So welcome everyone to Queer Pleasure, a poetry reading. Give it up for pleasure. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder with my partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the very space you find yourself in right now. The Bureau is what?
Starting the camera.
I did.
Just checking, it's not on yet.
I'm so sorry for the interruption. The Bureau of General Services Queer Division is a government agency for a government that does not yet exist. And this is the service that we provide, holding this space for queer culture and queer books. So welcome everyone here and everyone out there to this event. We're happy to host all 4 poets. I think we've hosted all of you before in the past, so welcome back. We're very happy to be doing events in person in spite of this never-ending pandemic. We are an all-volunteer organization, so we do have a suggested donation of $10, and there's change in the bag, so I'll pass that around. If money is tight and you would like to buy a book, you should hold on to your money and buy a book. That's a great way to support us as well. And if you don't have money, just enjoy the read. Pass that around. And we can also take a credit card at the register. And there are drinks there, in case you didn't notice that already. Beer, wine, and water. I think that's it for me, except to say that we have a lot of events coming up from now through the end of June. We will rest in July. And if you'd like to be on our email list, you can sign up for that at the register, and you'll get an email every Monday, every other Monday, I should say, about our upcoming events. So that's it for me. I'm going to introduce our first poet, and we're going to get started. Yeah. So Julia Guez is a writer and translator based in New York City. 4-Way Books released her first full-length collection in an invisible glass case, which is also a frame, in 2019. They will release her next book, The Certain Body, in 2022. Guez has been awarded the Discovery Boston Review Poetry Prize, a Fulbright Fellowship, and the John Frederick Nims Memorial Prize in Translation, as well as a Translation Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. She teaches creative writing at New York University and Rutgers. Please welcome Julia Guez.
Thank you all so much for being here. That is no small, oh my gosh, thank you for that. Give me about 10 minutes to figure it out. Being here is no small achievement these days, no small miracle or series of them. I really appreciate you coming out. I'm gonna read from each of the books that are dear to me and the only ones that I have, as we celebrate the birth of this new book, which is Pleasure. Which I'm so glad to be close to and part of the celebration around, and which I love. How do you feel about some wedding songs?
Yeah.
Let's do an epiphany. Anybody here know? Here's the first one. Leave the lily alone and gild the finger. Platinum is dactylic after all. Moon over Massachusetts, you are so civil. You exceed expectation. We can do without a week in Martinique, Glenlivet and Camillines. This is not a film. Besides, no water need redden into wine. This winter. This is the most tweeted poem I've ever written. And I think a lot of people believe that I wrote it in the height of the pandemic, which is not true. This came out a little bit before all of that went down, but I have some other poems from that window. This winter. Busy the hands with backgammon. Tell me about the year. The wifely chamomile and Clonopin, no help, have a saltine. This is to say, I understand. Once submersible, I am now a buoy. Fatigue is the new normal. One more wedding song, and then I want to read from a book of translations that I was lucky enough to put out with a friend. This one, I was so stubborn about the line breaks that my press, four-way, agreed to tilt the poem on the page because it had to be couplets, right? We couldn't carry anything over, but I'm sure it looks bizarre. I'm holding it in my hands. Epithalamium 2. A state one may in real desperation induce by subjecting the body to distress, up to and including sleeplessness, and or forbearance from routines in place is cleared for a reason. Also illusion. One may or may not recognize as such until more and more thorough attempts to reconcile versions of the same story show themselves to be irreconcilable at long last, calling the whole process into question. Also travel, as in relocation, outside the city, outside time and time's narrow definitions, also by other means. Not at all content with increments of more than a few days between the only ease to offset the rigor of this worrying, a carnal one. The late parade may not fully understand, beginning as it does with the red first, then yellow, hibiscus on the pillow, wilting. The new liturgy, of course, the northern one. But even here, rings around the bourbon on the bedside pattern themselves like so, and the effect thereof is reassuring. Few precedents for what follows, the weight of world without end arcs to this untold tenderness, the telling of which is at least one suicide away from the sunlit side of the garden where untold means not in the dark, but numberless. Numberless not without number, but many. The impulse to be not halved, somehow intact, after Pentonville, after Sachsenhausen, rain falling through the leaves until the whitest flowers loosen all at once. That lymph and startle, almost too much for any mathematics to model the groundswell of feeling afterlife. I'll read from a book of translations now with a couple notes. The first is that I quit coffee recently, and what might sound like a really fast reading outside seems so incredibly slow inside right now. I'm drinking what's called mud water, which has mushrooms, but not that kind, and chai and a handful of other things, and it slows everything down, but anyway, I love it, and it's strange. Also, I married a good Southern woman who has advised me that seersucker is actually not allowed until May. So I want to own, yes, but I have been told May until September, and I went with it anyway. And in honor of Richard Howard, I decided not only would the green sort of appear here, it also appears on the watch and under the first shirt, just because, and if I had green shoes, you know I'd be wearing those too. I'm going to read just a poem from Equestrian Monuments, which I co-translated with a friend of mine. It's from the Costa Rican poet Luis Chavez, who's a genius and an innovator and one hell of a pleasure to work with. So I'm going to read the last poem of the book, just in English, but if you're beguiled by the translation, you should see the poem, and it's in the book. False documentary. This is like 5 paragraphs, but it took us like 5 months to translate. So really, I'll read it particularly slowly. On TV, there's a horse. It is speaking our language. On the radio, there's a man speaking the language of horses. What is real must be happening somewhere else. For a second, the sun is still in a cloudless sky. A few hours ago, I scattered breadcrumbs for the birds on the balcony so they would come in the morning. They bring me such joy. They come closer, timidly at first pecking at the ground, giving me sidelong glances before flying off to another balcony. There couldn't be a sadder parabola. makes me think of something that has nothing to do with joy. Dust spreads through the dining room with the stealth of a sickness or a blessing, depending on who you ask. Yes, I know physics can explain this phenomenon. Why suspect the supernatural is at work? Other than a slow pan over the last few years, the day doesn't give us any other option. There's the debris, a tide washed up in a violent convulsion, one thing after the other, the beginnings and endings confused. Confusing our attempts at reconciliation with our failures to be reconciled. All of a sudden, a shift in the wind's direction and below, at street level, a driver responds as the light changes from red to green. And even though I'm wrong all the time, I am error's own disciple. I am interpreting this as a sign, as if the universe revolved around me. The lyrics of a song I must have misheard or stuck in my head. It's likely I'm only remembering parts that were never there to begin with. We tend to think a song is good if it seems to be about us. Everyone must lead very similar lives. If that's true, what to make of that girl on the sidewalk who doesn't know whether to eat the ice cream melting down her wrist or pet the dog jumping alongside her, wagging its tail. Before making my mind up sometime in September, I believed 2004 was going to be a good year. Now the house is a bag full of dirty clothes in the middle of the living room. 2 or 3 novels abandoned before I could finish them, ferry tickets, a message on the answering machine, that voice asking me about plans for last Friday or the one before that. This is how it is. A whole period of time can be condensed into a simple inventory. I meant to explain something else to you, but the will is misleading, like those mirrors at the gym. And yet, maybe it's okay to stay up here on the balcony without any birds, to see what within a few hours will overcome me. It's okay to revisit where I went wrong, to see it with my own eyes. The people we used to be are in a place where trial and error seem to repeat themselves again and again, while a song in the background tells us exactly what we want to hear. But this is the only place that matters. The leaves yield to the north wind and the smog of progress. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet, is the photo you took the night one of our phases ended, well before we thought it would. I'm writing this on a light-filled morning. I can see a plane between the buildings across the way, the ones facing Avenida Córdoba. It cuts across the sky in silence, in slow motion, as if its engines were fueled by memory. The outside world seems to flow with naturalness and calm. I want the inside world that way too. All right, a couple more from the newest, which will be out this September. And the first book I read took like 9 years. And this one, though I'm not supposed to admit this, so it's going to be between us, took like 9 months. But they were 9 pandemic months. So it's equivalent, right? Más o menos.
Yeah.
Cancels itself out. My face would think, maybe so. A couple here. Meditation at Callicoon. More and more night pretends it isn't spring. What to make of the daffodils then? Hyacinth here and there, wind and rain, so many birds. Of course, they won't stay long. None of this will. Not the night, the cold, the city full of swallows. Not the bridges and rivers, not the sea. No God born of the sea foam. Not even mothers and sons, this would be unbearable without. Now read just part of the middle poem. Partly because I have so much excitement for the poems to come, and I need to get sort of comfy in the chair so I This middle poem is the longest I've ever written, and it borrows its title, or steals it, frankly, from Susan Sontag, who wrote a book called Illness as Metaphor, which is a really interesting and complicated book, as is the addendum to that book, which is AIDS as Metaphor. And I mean, the one mentions she had never been sick, which she was while she was writing it. The other one mentions that or doesn't mention that she was gay. But in the first, there's this line about how illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. And, poets read this kind of thing and they just put it in the purse right away, and the only question is, do I note it or do I not? But it's mine from now on. So this is a poem that breaks itself down. We're going to read you a couple parts into the movements of a Holy Week that would begin in 2020. And the sort of 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Maundy Thursday, and the Friday Vigil, or the Good Friday, Saturday Vigil, and Easter, and pull itself out over the crisis that's happening in New York City. So I'll read you two parts. The first is Wednesday. So many Cassandras sing each to each. What we gathering cannot yet sense may as well be. For the record, I do not know Greek. Let there be a record. Let the record show my Greeklessness would matter greatly at several points, one or two in particular. May have been windwarding. The song, I mean, all those xylophones. Windwarding now to know the music was both knowable and known then when I was standing next to you in the last pew, with our coats still on because it was cold, and we would still have been hurrying to certain offices after. I will think of you often, performing these frail rites to bend the centrifugal back. Some, I am afraid, this will be one convalescence after another. Lilacs on every sill, profusely sad, knowing they too spread and spread. Not unlike the bells, ever widening rings of all kinds and the terrible swing of the censer. Sirens on the other side of this song, whose linens are loud with cries and are become our idioms. All right, let me end with this one, and lots of excitement for all the poetry to come. This is the second part, called Thursday, which engages this Maundy Thursday ritual, which can involve this very erotic washing of the feet. And it bases itself in part off of this wild fever dream I had when I had COVID. And I think every fever dream, this is now a policy position for me, should have a shower scene. And I thank God for the shower scene in this one. Thank you so much for having me, Angelo. Congratulations. Timothy, Ricky, I'm so excited for what's to come. And this government agency for a government that hasn't been invented yet, I am all in. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you for creating this space and continuing it. Thanks for having us. I was made American. You must consider this wanting badly to be washed clean in that night. Consider also the fever dream. In my case, fractals, which may or may not belong to otters who appear to be holding hands. I see the pair. So much dun-colored fur folding in on itself, I see the dark river. Fortunately, there is also a shower scene. I thank God for this part of the dream. The smell of that soap and all the seminarians there with me and my wife. In the dim light of this painterly onsen, glistening bodies, one is pale but not at all sickly. Pearlescent then, yes, and listen, live. Breasts not unlike a murmuration of birds. What they fever after, we fever after in tight swaths, circling, the warmest water laving feet, fascia, calves, the small of so many backs, homily of so many hands, lathering once bleeding eidolons. Every single scar, a story whose ending is clearly not one, for here we are, gently washing and washed. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Timothy Liu has taken early retirement after 24 years. After taking some time off, he will be joining the faculty at SUNY New Paltz in the fall. In the meantime, he has put the icing on his latest multi-layered cake under lockdown, also known as Trickle-Down Bedside Bottom Feeder Blues. He gives tarot readings at the Omega Institute for Holistic Studies in Rhinebeck and lives year-round in Woodstock, New York. Please give it up for Timothy.
Julia, that was beautiful reading. And you definitely know how to rock a seersucker blazer. And when you read the word seminarian, I always thought like that has to be someone who knows a lot about semen. This poem has been on the subway cars in town. It's called The Lovers. I was always afraid of the next card the psychic would turn over for us. Forgive me for not knowing how we were every card in the deck. And I want to dedicate this reading to my husband, Chris. We met 30 years ago, and he's still here tonight. And a big congratulations to Angelo, who writes the kind of poems I like to read. So I'm going to read all new poems. This is beatific poem. I took some time out to report the fire on a subway platform where someone had set a match to everything the homeless man owned. The riders who'd gotten there first kept on heading up those stairs in orderly fashion, making me wonder if I should follow. Fresh air a schlep away, but no, I was in love, refused to be struck down by the stench of smoke sucking up air, and surfaced on street level, only to go back down a block away, where the subway dude behind glass was cheerfully on the phone and seemed to entirely ignore the frantic waving of my arms, unable to drive back the thick smoke fast approaching. Maybe I should have called 911. Maybe I could warn off other commuters. Though who really runs headfirst into danger but the bravest in New York? This wasn't 9/11 concrete steel pancaking into a parking garage below. This was just a prank some bored student thought would be hilarious to post for a brief half second. I thought of posting myself, wondering how many would like what I had taken time out to capture. Because that pit bull in a flouncy tutu had just gotten off at the previous stop, and I couldn't help but think, what could possibly make anyone's day better than this? So I just got back from the Bay Area where I grew up, and the weather was gorgeous, and it was just a horrendous time to be within 10 miles of my family of origin. So the distance was really disturbing. So I'm just going to read a few poems I wrote out in California. This is California dreaming. I remember finding a quarter in a payphone slot and buying a jawbreaker from the candy machine near the entrance to the grocery store. I remember flipping through the National Enquirer in a checkout line, making sure that no one saw me cruising for cock. I remember counting cash to the beep of an ATM, warning me it was about to suck my card back in for good. I remember fighting against time, pulling out 5 gray hairs a day to make myself look younger. I remember the recycling drive, washing off newsprint from my fingertips after loading up a van with old papers a widow at the end of our block wanted us to take away. No questions asked. Carless in California. Imagine being late on car payments and having to walk around everywhere. This is how you become famous for 5 miles around. Each big fat lemon tree given a name. Each pine assessed for its state of water distress. Rusted out tips falling at your feet like confetti no one really wants to clean up as everyone speeds on by in their EVs. Have to admit, most days I feel like a fucking dinosaur with ED, stuck in a tar pit fit for some future museum no one particularly wants to drive to on such a hazy day like today. While interest rates climb, gas too at an all-time high, petroleum futures offsetting any bumps in the road, winding towards ecocide. What's a few mass graves captured by flyby drones, internment camps popping up like a black site near you? Tread marks of an armored vehicle leading to where? Sorry to have to break another lease, but my gap insurance has expired and there are too many holes in my shoes to keep the sands from spilling out onto first growth planks, reeking of pine and lemon scents, factory made outside of Elizabeth, NJ. And I've got the tats to prove it. Jesus, H-bomb Christ. I somehow thought couples counseling twice a week was really going to do the trick this time around, until I caught you jacking off the janitor behind an abandoned multiplex, masks discarded and blowing like tumbleweeds across that vacant expanse of parking lot, myself excluded. Golden State. Electric cars whiz by on the interstate overpass into sunsets bordering on apocalypse, where my mother used to push herself on a playground swing, humming a tune no one knew the words to till the attendants called her in. American flag on a pole, waving in a landscape that could have been so much better off had everyone refused to let her back out. "777 Hamburg Turnpike, Wayne, New Jersey. It's no longer called the King Chef Buffet, but that's where we met after class for unofficial tutorials. He'd pay for his own lunch and sometimes mine. He was no rookie finishing off a double Ironman. He'd swim all 4.8 miles. He'd cycle all 224 miles. He'd run all 52.4 miles. And I could picture myself cheering him on as he collapsed into my arms when crossing the finish. Lordy Lord, he had 8% body fat, both arms completely sleeved in Japanese tats. He told me how a bully once called him faggot in his senior year and ended up dislocating his jaw that had to be wired shut before his fitness obsession began taking off. He sang in a glam rock band called Tristan. They toured up and down Australia, opening for a major act. Girls who clung to each of his arms were called accessories, better than eye candy. He liked the way I talked about poems, loved continental philosophy, could run circles around Derrida and Barthes. One time he called me from a payphone at 4 a.m. after a night out bar hopping in Hoboken in a bleak age before cell service. Want to come downstairs and party, stay up with me until dawn? I said, don't call this number again. See you in class. He wrote strong poems, graduated with honors, and now we were back stuffing our faces at an all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet when he asked if I knew of anything that wasn't on the menu. Oh, Jason, I said, I can't believe you're done. He looked over his shoulder and said, Tim, of all the men I've ever met in my entire life, you're the only man I want to take my virginity. This was in an age before Me Too. This was ships coming in. I had just gotten tenure. His words probably set me back 5 years to freshman orientation when I first set eyes on him. Was it Rumi who said, I asked for 1 kiss and instead you gave me 6. He who was teacher is now the student. The silence was more than pregnant. Jason, that may well be the most beautiful thing anyone has ever heard. The food before us had turned forgettable. Where would this progressive dinner be ending up next? It'd take another 5 years before we actually hooked up. The ripeness was all, and the imagination was entirely to blame. Last year, he built me a backyard deck out of 2x4s. He nailed it all down and sanded it smooth before throwing down 3 thick coats of a waterproof stain. He lives in Baltimore now with his wife and kids. One day, he'll be old enough to send them off to school to get a real education. Naked forms you can lay right down on weathered boards. And this is it, last poem. This is, how many of you know Led Zeppelin's album, Physical Graffiti? Okay, right, the best. So the epigraph, because it was just the first time and you knew you would. He first kissed me in the old LaGuardia. He must have been flying on American to O'Hare. I was feeling sad. I wasn't expecting more than a hug. Orange benches of a lower level Dunkin' burning the moment into my brain. Or was it Krispy Kreme serving their usual shit coffee? Can't be sure. I was sad because he was leaving after we had spent a few days holed up in the Larchmont. The building stands, though the hotel is gone, along with the French roast on the corner where I used to meet my other lovers. When buildings outlast the dramas they have staged, How can it not be tragic? Ever sleep with someone for 3 nights in a row in the same bed and not fuck? Because it was his first time with a man and I really wanted to take it slow. Years later, he told me how he jerked off in the bathroom down the hall before coming back to bed where I had already fallen in love, pretending to be asleep. We had walked the Brooklyn Bridge, took selfies in front of places where Hart Crane had a view, where Lorca had been rumored to cruise the docks below. Those buildings since overtaken by Jehovah's Witnesses, watchtower pamphlets littering the streets instead of immortal poems. Might that also make you sad? 2 men nursing ginger ales at the village vanguard without needing to start their day counts over. No matter what one drinks, the 2-drink minimum costs the same. Jazz is a crime. That's what we did on our last night in town. And now I don't remember the name of the band or what song was playing over the LaGuardia PA when he set his bags down and planted one square on my mouth, not knowing if I even liked it, as bulldozers and jackhammers made their eternal rounds to make way for the new.
Thank you, Timothy. So Ricardo Alberto Maldonado was born and raised in Puerto Rico. He lives in New York, where he serves as managing director at 92nd Wise Unterberg Poetry Center. Maldonado is the author of The Life Assignment from 4-Way Books. Please welcome Ricardo.
Hello, everyone here and at home. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the Bureau. Again, it's so lovely to be here in person after doing what 2, maybe 3 events online. I will be reading some poems from the book, which is here. You can purchase it and I will sign it. Otherwise, you can purchase it online and new poems. I may be reading in Spanish as well, depending on how much time I have. But I really want to test out a new poem that hasn't been translated into English, so you will have to bear with me on that. But that's gonna happen like 3rd in. I give you my heart. I find myself on my feet with 15 leaves. Everything carries its own weight on the walls. I woke up to slaughter, my heart opening cemeteries of noon, the parasites, the drizzle, the moon, the mud crowning the undergrowth with immense sadness. I knew that when I dressed in my uniform, I found the index of my solitude, my country, and its legal jargon, its fiction, its piety. Yes, it loves me, really. I give my blood as the blood of all fish. I should know that poem by heart, but for some reason I just sort of like messed it up. So this is a poem that was triggered by the use of the word "fake" on the train in Brooklyn, right? That most liberal of cities or boroughs in New York. So here we go. 6 words I had to use today. If you, America, were owning, for example, your Brooklyn as locus for absolute gift, reach for us safely with your Charter of Rights for the Republic, a charter of management and economic stability would suggest we were subject to your dissertation as we were your readers. America, are you the precedent? The sea train in its abstract melancholy. Then forgive us when we lean towards a mystery inside. For example, our people called me Capricorn and Bushwick, speak in Park Slope, suggested a translation of my name, but that was in New Jersey. If I were to find one thing inside six walls, it would be Marcus, my boss's cat, a deadbolt making home out of Thanatos, so I may hope to be a human breather. 2 weeks after Maria, I send a text, despite keeping no receipt, for $3. Oh, America, lay your immense wake over me. I alone in my room for us, I sing, America, whom you are holding now in hand. Book, forgive me everything. I've gotten up in my used sheets, America, at 6 in the morning with a poem in mind. That poem also references austerity measures in Puerto Rico implemented by Republican Congress and President Obama, which are still crippling the island and will do so in perpetuity for many, many years to come. This is our problem. This is your problem, right? So now shifting gears in defense of this poem references Centro Médico, which is the main hospital, public hospital in Puerto Rico. And I think that's really all you need to know. In defense of the life assignment, it started at the surface, feeling about my face at 38, the law jawbone my mother had given me as weapon against austerity when 2 decades before my father had died. I was 18, desperate under summers isosceles. A fragile machine descended with a yellowing haste on the city. Who had I been then but the sediment inside? Blessed are the reddening of medical pins. I venerated my mother at Centro Médico, her prayer cards at midnight. The saffron of her blood coursed a thick mass on concrete inside coral veins. Mother, tonight it snows in another city besieged by comet tails. You breathe the sharp instrument of men on your heart. They weighed the wings of your lung. It was midnight when I went in search of angels in the shoes of the sick near the gates of heaven. On the 7th day, we all take repose in the kingdom of the sick. Blessed are they, blessed the cold comfort of the wind rushing over teeth. Blessed the long corridors of heaven. Blessed the gelatin in refrigerators, the instant coffee, so many hands opening blue over the glass. Blessed that sentence of silver, a flower. Blessed may they be blessed. Poets are keen on listing, right? Making list poems. And this is one that feels like was interminable until I forced myself to stop. The commodities market, where one finds poetry, one finds the Lord, God of epic, the golden instrument on our Lord's plumes, the pelt of our Lord, a tree for heavens. Remember Jose Daniel, the God we engraved on our desks, Christ of our Lord, Christ of our children, Lord's denominator in our Lord's arithmetic, a pair of children's scissors, God at our borders, the salt of our Lord, God's ocean of cotton, of sugar, a name for God, the Lord elephant, a Lord mule, Lord's acres, hospital Lord Texas for God, Alabama, God's sea of blue tarps, our Lord's November and August for God, roses of God for the roses, clouds for the Lord. Will the gods disappear, their arms full of roses? Lord's wound, flowering red. One heaven of fog clouding faces for a heaven of roses, a heaven for God, our Lord in the darkness of numbers. Lord's icebox, Lord's cages for the children of God, an armful of roses for the roses of God, God's labor, God's Wednesdays as labor, and the labor of God. I feel like I want to read new stuff. Yeah, let's do this poem I've never read in person. Well, yeah, let's do a known one and a new one. Lesionado. Maybe this will be a poem about power, reading, rereading, whatever shape new intelligence takes. Somewhere, somehow the men go, the state goes, somewhere seems to destroy, only we should be beautiful and practical, finding beauty will stand everywhere among two Victorias, my brother and I among them. Home for the noun, home for soil. 1, 2, 3, 4, I among them. Maybe this is a poem about power. Maybe this is a poem about love. Let's do new poems. Most of these are in my book, but these are not. And I'm gonna do like the kids do, which is read from phones. You did that as well. I just never read from my phone, and I find that interesting, right? So I'm gonna read a poem in Spanish because it's new. I read it online at an event with Gabby's for Gabby's release, which I highly recommend you buy it. Madness, it's on sale. And then I'm gonna read with the newest one. Expiación novena del sábado mañana 2 de abril. Cuánta escarcha dará testimonio reluciente de la democracia cuando tomaba agua porque tengo sed. Me daba tener frío, pero en la caja me preservé un material plástico desnudo amarillo. ¿Cuánto duraré si me gustas América? Y cuando estoy solo, me encuentro. Soñé un libro para el Hudson de 1000 hombres empapados como plaga desgastando el alma que llevan todos los hombres. Me incluyo. En la faz de América defendiendo tan ágil, mi capital del asalto del fémur es interminable. Aprendo el verbo cobrar, el verbo préstamo. Diagramé oraciones, quiero vivir tanto. ¿Qué hará brillar, pues? ¿Qué de los poemas? El río se amarillenta de palomas, escarcha blanca en taza. ¿Cuándo seré penetrado por los mecánicos déspotas del invierno del silencio? Tengo 3 dedos en el fregadero de la sed. Ahora un cambio sobremesa en mí, lleno de dólares, el billete de taxi, aeropuerto San Juan, a JFK, donde cepillo mi cuero cabelludo con el pulso insuficiente. Venden borraduras el clima de Ocean Park para el banco tentear patrón suyo, esto suyo, suyo será. En la casa de mi abuela, la sala se hundía, su sala en el viento. Tendré un balcón de albahaca Namú para lavarme mientras reciben las actas raspadas de la bandera mía. It's good for me to hear that because I had to change that. And then one last poem that was asked. I was asked to write a poem about trolling, but I took that as an invitation to write a confession because I feel like in most cases social media is asking us to market ourselves, right? And so how can we work against that but confess, right? So this is a very new poem, etc., etc. In America, New York, I found myself a system of blows deafening me because you've seen me where I'm doing. Have you heard the trademarks of your struggles? Every human hand is a solid object, but it feels invisible. I'm mending 100 of Norwegian sheets from the assets of the state myself. 6 for an ego of mine I swore I would use, bread of the people. But I thought differently in love, a rending look at the object, sensing I've done what I've known myself. I have been loved in empire all my life. We will have a pleasant Friday, won't we? Will my feet be washed? Touch here. Confess your sin at wholesale. I'm keeping a pebble like the relatives I had in me. A bullet on screen where I peddle blows from myself. Will I mourn the deep womb of my country, but from afar? Indicate in pairs which of the following words you associate with democracy, or colony, or faggot. To whom do you remit payment? I answer myself, I want to be good with me. Please forward. Where in our body do we find the beginning and the pain? Which adjective is elected when we're being the electorate? Describe the avatar of democracy. Please share. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. Angelo Nikolopoulos is the author of Obscenely Yours and Pleasure. Pleasure. Four-Way Books 2022. He teaches at Hunter College. Please say hello to our good friend and loved one, Angelo. Okay, so Realty, thank you so much for coming because it is the first nice Saturday night in New York and you're here. And I have friends who I know for 20 years and they all just texted me saying, hey girl, love you, but I'm having wine and oysters. Sorry. So I really appreciate that you're here on this very gorgeous night in New York City in a poetry reading. So you deserve like everything. So there's that. I'm gonna read just a few poems from my book called Pleasure. I wrote it one summer when I lived on an island in Greece called Syros, and I rented a house by myself in this tiny little cove, and I wanted to be as alone as possible. I was thinking a lot about why some people hate to be alone, whereas others want to be alone, right? Sort of like choosing between to be in a relationship or not to be in a relationship. And so as I was there, I found myself thinking about my first boyfriend from high school. His initial is G, and he'll come up occasionally. A type of luxury. Encased in myself, I walk along the port admiring somatic codes. A fisherman hauling his load, a woman through a window extending her neck. If I could eat them all, I believe I would. In the Venn diagram of the heart, how do pleasure and solitude overlap? I am a foreigner dressed in black, besotted, the word itself a type of luxury, with the privilege of my own seaside sadness. That beauty exists outside myself is a consolation. It's like watching love happen elsewhere. When I pause at the steps of the cathedral, it is in a young girl's baptismal gown, as white as inexperience. Lift the hem of your dress, her father says, so it doesn't get dirtied. The pleasure. The first one, it existed before sex, but was attached to love. In gym class, I'd focused my entire being on the thin crust of skin between his underwear band and shirt. And later, the sudden shock of arousal, warm as light leak from a camera, when G parted the branches between his parents' house for me to pass through in the night. It was the pleasure of being shown the way. The edge. My body exists for itself in two general forms, boredom and hysteria. Each an appetite, what I put into myself. If I smoke too early, it will ruin the entire day. Here's what I did with my body. I collected moon-colored stones, watered the basil, swept the marble floors for the pleasure of the sound. I picked and I carried ripened figs in the fold of my shirt, something seen in a film. I walked to the edge of the cliff and I walked myself back. What I ingest, white wine, panoramic view, comes out of my body, pissing off the cliff. There is no other way. I am cruising because I'm alive. It is a reflexive desire when faced with self-annihilation that pulses at the edge of the cliff. The body says to the mind, let me live, but it cannot. One pleasure replaces another. There is no progress. tell you what for. SOS. If it's true that there is someone for everyone, which is to say, someone will find you beautiful, it must also be true. There will always be someone who finds you repulsive. Where it ended. In the morning twilight, in a quiet hysteria, I test my fear of nature along the desolate coastline. The stones radiate their own temperature and odor. I walk to the farthest point along a slate of rock and then the cruelest blue. Why do I say fear? Don't you adore the green grass, Mary Oliver, with its terror beneath? For what is the grass, Whitman anachronistically, but the beautiful uncut hair of graves? I do not adore the grass, but my feelings toward the sea cucumber are tender. Laguna Tide Pools High School, I discovered one, green and translucent, marooned in a shallow pool. Because I could not flagellate myself, I prodded it with a stick. Agitated, it expelled white, sticky filaments. Looks like cum, someone said. Why is the melancholic man lyrical? Why does he walk barefoot to the farthest point? What does he remember? In our last bed, G was high on acid. When he began to wet himself, and I felt the urine soaking through the linens, I pressed into him until I no longer knew where the wetness began and where it ended. I imagined our young love standing outward from a wet embrace as if from a radiation zone. The morning's cul-de-sac, the terror of an end. What was there to bring back but a handful of dirt? If there is a pleasure in remembering, if there is a disembodied voice singing in the dark, it says, you have come this far, what next? A silky attitude. Do you guys know the film Never on Sunday? No one? It's from 1969. It's a Greek film starring Melina Mercouri, who plays a prostitute. An American named Homer falls in love with her and tries to reform her. So, a silky attitude. To pass the time, I watched the film Never on Sunday. In prostitute drag, Melina Mercouri sings, because at night as I go to port, I am waiting to find an unknown person. In her tawdry apartment, bauble-ridden and lined with needlepoint, she enacts the arrows of memory. Writhing on her body, writhing on her bed, she is a bug-eyed beauty. I sit on my own bed, my tan legs folded like a lawn chair, smashing against my own sex. Outside in the night, men brood along the rocks, worry-beaded. A palikari, Mercury relishes, is a strong young man, and together we go to the moon. Genet, in a letter to Sartre, it should be added something which is only true of our homosexual situation, that to refuse life implies taking on a lonely and passive attitude, to be a woman who in society is submissive and waits for a man to put her in her place. It is, he says, a silky attitude. Hi. Come in. What we love. In the square where I buy wine poured from a barrel, the shopkeeper asks for my number. I will show you the beautiful waters. As much as I admire Mercury's prostitute, we are never what we love. This means I am Homer, the American set to reform her, thereby restoring Greece to her ancient purity. He is invested in art and symbols. I take notes throughout the film too, mining for signs, a redemptive message from 1960. Love your baby face, the shopkeeper writes. I'm hard fucker, he adds, with 3 thunderbolt emoji. Are there 2 ways of knowing the world? One passive, the other insatiable. When the film's over, I go and smoke beneath the stars. This is a romantic gesture. Gestures are all I have. When the shopkeeper arrives and removes his pants, I discover his entire right thigh branded in a black cover-up tattoo. A cylinder of black, as if his upper thigh has been omitted. In the dark, when he mounts me, it's like being fucked by an amputee. Afterwards, he demands a meal. You are not out to your parents, I say. Don't you want them to know you before they die? I lie across his chest, fanned out like a child. What can I ever know about a man? What is possible? It's not of their business, the shopkeeper finally says. His belly protrudes. We look out across the field, softened by the sunset. I have been put in my place. I lean into his chest and decide I will never see him again. This too is a romantic gesture. California Gold. Morning scene, a bludgeoning. The cat has mauled a bird. Red smears the balcony, marble. The waves continue doing their thing. A solitary person resorts to signs. Each accident is an omen. I walk the square and the villagers sit on benches where they appear evil and sick with love. To my horror, I discover the blog I kept as a teen continues to exist online. November 10th, 1999. After fucking on the beach, by the pier and the Ferris wheel and the ocean and the alcohol, we slept on my twin bed. I barely dared to breathe. When I left, G was crashing with a director in West Hollywood, strung out on meth, a bad cliche. In his first pornographic film, California Gold, he's alive and well, riding a motorcycle through the Hollywood canyons. In the opening credits, he pulls to the roadside and pisses along the thistle. He emits a grunt of pleasure and straddles the bike. The narrative begins. Behind the black. More wind today. I pick and I pick at a hangnail until it bleeds. In Transsexual Heartbreakers Scene 4, G visits his childhood babysitter to confess his crush. Preempting his disclosure, she says, I have a secret I want to show you, and withdraws her cock from her panties. Oh my gosh, you have a cock, he says, then sucks her. You're so good at it, she says, just like your daddy. I am turned on when she mounts them, fucking him from behind. I jerk off at the kitchen table. The video has been viewed 61,867 times. Sleepless Sleep. There is no bracket, no closure, just openness. The cruise ship moves across my window with its comical lights, and when it's gone, it leaves behind the black canvas of my sleeplessness. Seeing the end. Unceremoniously, my blog ends in a single sentence entry dated May 6, 2000. I'm a beast who deserves to die. Posted by AN at 4:32 a.m. The entry stands alone without any context. I do not remember ever typing these words, but the emotional impulse is familiar. It resonates with me biologically. It is how I feel when I listen to Skeeter Davis sing The End of the World. There is no pleasure in the act of writing. Pleasure exists instead in the echo that follows or the ache that precedes it. Always an end or beginning. I can only find joy in the beginning or ending of a world. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you.
Please hang out, check out the books,
I will.
and yeah, maybe buy some.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.